Please welcome the Bay Area Discovery Museum CEO and Executive Director, Karen Flynn.
All right, so last year when I spoke, I had this lapel mic, and they said, you know what, your voice is too deep and you don't project enough, so we're going to give you the Britney Spears mic this year. So if I am not projecting enough or speaking loud enough, you in the back need to wave your hands and let me know. First of all, I want to thank everybody for joining us today for Creativity Forum. And before we get started, I want to say a couple of special thank yous. First to our event co-chairs, Linda Chong and Adrian Yamaki from the Board of Trustees. Susie Heyer and Amy Morgan from the Discovery Council, our host committee, our corporate sponsors, and most importantly, all of the educators who took the time out of teaching our children to be with us today. Let's give them a round of applause. I also wanted to make one special introduction and note of recognition for the forum's youngest ever attendee, who is Tyga Heft up here at table 16. Do you want to say hi? Today's theme is innovation, and the Bay Area Discovery Museum is deeply committed to innovation in early childhood learning and development through our mission to ignite and advance creative thinking for all children. To achieve this ambitious mission, we are reimagining the role of the museum in the community. We are designing museum experiences such as Messy Art, Science Lab, Dig Deeper Science Series, and our on-site preschool. All of these focus on child-directed learning, process over product, and total engagement of the child. Through our most ambitious effort, our Center for Childhood Creativity, which was launched here at Creativity Forum 2 years ago, we have made significant progress. We have trained over 500 pre-K teachers in San Francisco and Marin County, and were recently awarded the 2014 California State Superintendent's Award for Excellence in Museum Education. We have had over 600 children participate in on-site research studies through our partnerships with Stanford, Berkeley, and Mills College. These have been on a wide range of topics, including social cognition, causal reasoning, and language acquisition. We've also published recently our first white paper entitled Shared Discoveries, Positive Parent-Child Interactions and Child Development. Over the next year, we will continue to offer professional development for teachers and build out our research strategy. This will include publishing additional white papers on creative thinking, establishing a distance learning lab on site, adding research fellows, and most importantly, translating the most innovative and influential research on creative thinking in young children for parents, educators, and our staff. All of this innovative work is possible because of the generosity of the community that we live in. And I want to thank each of you for being here today and helping support this work. In particular, I'd like to thank our many corporate sponsors, and in particular, Wells Fargo for their ongoing and long-standing support of all of our educational programming, as well as JP Morgan Chase for their anchor sponsorship in the Center for Childhood Creativity. Their sponsorship has allowed us to reach teachers, students, and families across the Bay Area with a particular emphasis in Hunters Point, Bayview. Please give them a round of applause. And now, most importantly, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, whose work is the embodiment of innovation. Tim Brown is CEO and president of IDEO, an award-winning global design firm that takes a human-centered, design-based approach to helping organizations in the public and private sectors innovate and grow. Tim is an industrial designer by training, and his work has won numerous awards and has been exhibited at galleries and museums. He's also a writer, having published a book called Change by Design, and contributed to many publications, including Harvard Business Review, as well as maintaining his blog on design thinking. And happily, and most importantly for us, he's a speaker. Many of you have probably seen his talks, Serious Play and Change by Design, on TED.com. Today, he's here to talk with us about how innovation begins in early childhood and is a critical skill for children to develop today in order to become tomorrow's innovators in the workplace and beyond. With that, please welcome Tim Brown.
Thank you. Well, hello. Okay. Projection okay? Good. All right. So, thanks. It's great to be here. Great to be here in front of such a huge crowd. It's delightful to see how an institution that actually I've been aware of for a very long time. How the Bay Area Discovery Museum. My kids went and visited the Bay Area Discovery Museum. I guess not long after it was opened. I'm not sure what year you guys got going, but I think it's the late 80s, early 90s, something like that. So my two daughters were born in 91 and 93, and I remember taking them to the Bay Area Discovery Museum in the summertime when they were little, and I have this vague recollection, admittedly it's a long time ago, of some big dragon being built in the courtyard, some sort of art project, I think, and my daughters used to love going and seeing that and participating a little bit, even though they were only, I think, about 2 or 3 years old at the time. So that was some of their first experiences of what a creative institution was. And so I'm delighted to be here today to help support it, and I'm very glad that all of you are here as well. Now, we're going to have a little creative challenge right now. One of it is going to be how you're going to do this next thing that I want you to do and eat your lunch at the same time. So we'll see how innovative you all are in being able to pull that off. But you know, I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes or so talking about kids and creativity. But first, I want to do a little test on you all. So you'll find under your plates, you've got a piece of paper. One side of it has got a bunch of circles on it. The other side of it is plain. Turn it so that you've got the plain side up. Okay? We're going to get to the circles later. So don't throw the piece of paper away when you're done with this first exercise, because we're going to lose it. We're going to use it. All right? And then I want you to go find you should have a pen or a pencil or something somewhere. And then if you're really smart, you'll find something to rest on. So the creative ones have already grabbed the pads from the middle of the table. The slow coaches amongst you are trying to figure out how you're going to be able to do this on your knees. Okay? All right. So your task now is you've got 30 seconds when I say go to draw a portrait of your next door neighbor. Okay? So 30 seconds is plenty of time. It's plenty of time. And so when I say go, see, and the clever ones have already started. The clever ones have already started. But when I say go, which is now, start sketching. So get going. You want to draw the essence of the person next to you in 30 seconds. You're nearly halfway through. So if you're still trying to figure out where to draw the drawing, you're not doing very well. All right, you're down to the last 10 seconds now. All right, and 3, 2, 1, stop. Okay. All right. Okay, very good. I'm glad it energized the room. Okay, and now I know what it feels like to be a teacher in the front of a classroom of unruly kindergarten kids. All right, so my guess is, and in fact I heard a few of them. There was more than one apology when you showed that picture next to your neighbor, right? More than one slightly embarrassed smile as you proudly showed your portraiture skills. Now the interesting thing is that if you ask young kids to do this exercise, you know, sort of kids that are less than 5 or 6 years old, there's none of that embarrassment. There are no sorries. Every kid is very proudly displaying the picture that they created for their neighbor. And but But somehow, as we become adults, we become more sensitive to the opinions of others, and that constrains our creativity. And this freedom to be playful, and this freedom to express ourselves, is something that that is a natural part of all kids, and it's what I would call creative confidence. That all young children, many of the young kids that come along to the Bay Area Discovery Museum, have lots of creative confidence, and I'll come back to talking a little bit about what that is later. But unfortunately, most of us lose it during our school years. And most of us don't rediscover our creative confidence. And unfortunately, that means we don't necessarily fulfill our potential to be innovators. Now, for me, the way I kind of rediscovered my creative confidence, I went through a very traditional English school system, which I can assure you is not well designed to produce creative people. But I kind of rediscovered it by making things. And you know, Lego, I'm sorry, I'm English, so I call it Lego. You guys call it Legos, I think. I don't know why we had that difference, but it turned out to. But Lego, for me, was the beginning of that. Learning how to explore through making. Learning how to just think, oh, I'd like to build an airplane, and spend the next couple of hours figuring out how to build that airplane, was actually crucial in me sort of rediscovering my creative confidence. And right through my school years, right through my teenage years, I was building and making things all the time. I'd disappear up into the top floor of my parents' house and spend all day at the weekends just making stuff. So that by the time I got to art school, I was sort of comfortable with the idea of making. I was comfortable with the idea of expressing myself. And indeed, Lego for me was actually the material that I used to develop my first ever commercial product. I was, I think, 7 at the time, and living in England back in the 70s was a bit like living, I don't know what the right analogy would be today, but it was kind of a third world country in terms of infrastructure at the time. We had big power cuts almost all the time. So, and that meant, unfortunately, that our kitchen would go dark and my mother couldn't cook me my dinner. So I decided one day I'd gather all of my Lego, which also fortunately consisted of lots of these bricks that lit up, and built this enormous flashlight and took it to my mother and sat it above our stove and said, okay, now you can cook my dinner when the power goes out. And so Lego for me was not only a toy, it was actually the way I first learned to become a designer. And as I said, unfortunately, most kids don't discover a means to express themselves creatively as they grow older. But the need for us to have creativity within society has never been greater than it is today. I thought I'd just set the stage for a little bit. You know, the world, and I think we're all conscious of this, is getting more volatile and more complex around us all the time. And we see the impact of financial disruption and technological disruption and environmental disruption and many other forms of disruption going on all around us. The world is not a place where we can safely assume that how things are today will be how things are going to be tomorrow. I mean, in business, we're seeing tremendous disruptions happening everywhere. I mean, the life expectancy of a Fortune 500 company today is 45 years and coming down. The 40% of new companies last less than 10 years. And the average life of all companies is only about 12 and a half years. So this idea that we had sort of in the Industrial Revolution, this idea that we had in the 1970s, the 80s maybe, which was that businesses grew and they lasted and they became these institutions and they provided stability. They provided stability in the marketplace. They provided stability in terms of jobs, in terms of careers, and in terms of employment, is simply no longer true. You know, most of the Fortune 100 that we see today will not be the Fortune 100 in 20 or 30 years' time. And of course, we're seeing whole industries be disrupted in front of our eyes. This is an old example now, in the sense that, the iPod disrupted the music publishing industry. We don't even buy iPods anymore. Only 10 years after they're invented, and we don't buy iPods anymore. They're on our phones. We don't need to buy iPods. And we're seeing a series of industries being disrupted, and they're being disrupted because of technology. But our responses to that technology require more and more innovation. Not just innovation about the technology itself, but everything we put around it. Just a couple of years ago, IBM did a survey of about 1,500 CEOs, asking them about how they were dealing with the complexity that they see in the world today, and how they were dealing with volatility, and what were the leadership responses that they most needed in this more complex world that they were trying to lead their businesses in. And the number one ingredient that they responded with was creativity. That what we need more than anything else in business leadership today is creative leadership, the ability to respond to a changing world, the ability to lead people to new solutions. So there's never been more demand for it. And yet, unfortunately, I don't think we're doing anything like enough to produce it in terms of our own kind of human capital. We're not focusing on it as much as we might. And so we need to think that, we need to unlock what I call the creative confidence of many, many more people, so that we're all better able to adapt and innovate. And I use this term, creative confidence. It's actually a book written by my colleagues David and Tom Kelly earlier this year, because it actually, I think, expresses what is often the underlying issue. It's not that we don't have the inherent ability to be creative. It's we lack the confidence to be creative. And so the way I would define creative confidence is as a mindset. It's the natural talent we actually all have to explore new ideas, but it's the confidence then to act on them. And that's really, many people would actually define innovation as not the having of new ideas, but it's the acting on the having of new ideas. It's putting new ideas out into the world. That's what ultimately makes the difference. And so if we lack the confidence to act on our ideas, then we lack the capacity to innovate. But there are people that discover their creative confidence. There are people that go ahead and make a difference because they've done that. And I'd like to tell you the story about one of them. This guy is a guy by the name of Doug Dietz, and he led the development of all of GE's medical imaging and medical scanning products, so MRI scanners. And some years ago, he just finished spending about 2.5 years developing a new MRI machine, which he was very proud of. And he jumped at the chance to go and visit one of the first installations of this machine in a hospital, and I think it was in Pittsburgh, but I can't quite recall. And he went and visited and was talking to the nurse technicians that were running the scanning suite, and he was proudly telling them of how this machine was already winning awards. It had been entered for design awards, and he was being very proud of this technology. And then the nurse asked him if he could leave the scanning suite because it was a pediatric scanning suite, by the way, because a young girl was coming to be scanned, and she was coming down the hallway sobbing, and she was quite upset. And by the time she got into the scanning suite, the nurse picked up the phone and called the anesthesiologist to sedate her in order to go have this scan. And Doug was somewhat surprised and asked the nurse, and she said, "No, we have to sedate something around 80% of the children we have go through these scanners." And he was horrified. Here was somebody who was so proud of this technology that he thought was helping save lives, and yet here was seeing these little kids literally scared to the point of crying of going through this experience. and he simply didn't know what to do about it. So he went back home, he talked to his boss, who, while his boss had been at P&G, he'd been out to this part of the world and been to a design boot camp at the Stanford D School. And so his boss recommended that Doug go take a trip and come and do one of the exec programs at the Stanford D School, which he did. And he spent a week diving into design thinking and a week exploring how to develop new ideas and prototype them and connect with others and learn about needs and all this kind of stuff. And he came out of that experience with a newfound confidence. And he decided he was going to do something about these scanning machines. So what he did was to gather a team, a small interdisciplinary team, to redesign not the scanners themselves, the technology, because that was going to be too expensive, but the experience around the scanner. And so they created what's called the Adventure series of MRI scanners, and you can see one of them here. And it's a pirate adventure. There's a pirate ship. And so there's a whole story that goes along with this adventure. And each of the scanning suites you can see is completely decorated to turn it into this pirate adventure. And the nurses have a script that they follow. And the kids go through this experience, and they're told that while they're on the pirate ship, they have to be very still so that the pirates don't find them. And then when they get to the far side, they get some pirate treasure. And there's also a space version. And in the space version, the kids are told to listen very carefully for the moment that as they go through this, the hyperdrive starts. And this is a way of dealing with the incredibly loud crashing and banging that goes on in these machines as they go through them. And the payoff for Doug was not just that it cut the amount of sedation of kids going through these scanners considerably, and that the kind of patient satisfaction for these machines has gone up by 90%. The payoff came the day he was visiting one of these suites, and a little girl jumped off the scanner at the end and asked her mummy, "Should we go do that again tomorrow, please?" So, here's somebody who managed to kind of unlock his own creative confidence, who managed to take what was a kind of crisis in his career in a way, and go do something about it. And what I think would be tremendously exciting is if every kid had that creative confidence when they came out of high school, every kid had that creative confidence when they went into college, and all of us had it in our careers, because I think we'd find many, many uses for it. Now, as you may have kind of gathered or surmised as I was describing this, just having the creative confidence on its own isn't quite enough. We need the tools to actually allow us to express that confidence in some way. And that's what design thinking is about for me. It's a set of tools that allows us to express our creative confidence in meaningful, purposeful ways. And there are very many kind of important components to it. And I could talk about many, but I'm just going to talk about three this morning, or this afternoon as it is now. The first of them is one that it may seem obvious to us, but it is one that we spend remarkably little time doing. And that is actually exploring choices, actually creating new options. It turns out that we spend most of our time, particularly as adults, actually making choices out of existing sets of options that are sort of analytical tendency to approach in the way that we approach the world tends to mean that we'll look for see what options are available, and we'll pick the one that makes the most sense. But by definition, that cannot be creative, right? Because somebody's already created all those options for us already. And it's very rare that breakthrough ideas were going to come that way. Because for a breakthrough idea, you need something that's not existed before. And so if you think about, we spend most of our time in a world of making choices, in a world of converging down on the best option. What we need to spend more of our time doing, and what we need to spend our time doing if we're actually looking for for innovative solutions is to create new choices, to be thinking divergently, to be thinking about many, many options. And so this is where you get to do your next exercise of the morning. You see, this is a full participation lunch. I think this is an idea that's worth practicing a little bit. Now, you've probably all tried things like brainstorming in business to varying degrees of success. I suspect many of you have felt somewhat disappointed about how successful it is, and I'm not going to go into why that is today, but suffices to say it's like, for many people, brainstorming is a bit like trying to play football without knowing what the rules are. It turns out to be quite difficult. The same is true of brainstorming. But we're going to actually use a different technique right now, and it's one that was a favorite of this guy. This guy's somebody by the name of Bob McKim, and Bob founded the visual thinking and design program at Stanford. And so what we now see is the D School and everything else. That all started with Bob back in the 60s. And this is a favorite exercise of his. So that piece of paper that you did that masterpiece portrait on a little earlier, on the other side, you'll see this. You'll see a whole bunch of circles. Okay. Now, what I'm going to want you to do is, in a minute, so I'm being quite generous with my time here. I'm giving you a whole minute. I want you to draw as many different objects, based off that circle as you can in a minute. So, one could be a football, one could be the sun. I mean, there are lots of different possibilities. And what I care about is how many you get done. So I want you to draw as many as you can in the next minute, starting from now. Each one's got to be different, by the way. No drawing the same thing 55 times or 30 times. Okay, nearly halfway. So if you're still on your third one, then you might want to speed up a bit. Last 10 seconds. Probably got time for that last one. And we're done. Okay. All right. So, wow, you gotta get you guys to shut up, can't we? Wow, amazing. Okay, all right, class, time for quiet, thank you. Excellent. All right, so how many people got more than 20? How many people got more than 20? All right, we've got a couple of creative geniuses in the room, and who got more than 10? Many. Oh, that's a little bit better. I mean, who got less than 5? Anybody willing to admit that? No. Oh, yes, somebody over here. Jolly good. Okay. All right. So it turns out to be quite difficult, doesn't it? It turns out to be quite tricky to explore lots of options. There are different ways of doing it, of course. But and you can see some of the examples up on the screen here. Okay, all right. Shh. Boy, oh boy, this is amazing. I've never had an audience quite as noisy as this one before. Well, except for one. I did do a speech down in San Diego a couple of years ago for the National Student Association of whoever our age, the people that look after the residential housing. And I had 4,000 kids chanting and cheering all the way through a speech. It was in the basketball stadium at UC San Diego. It was a wonderful experience, but I couldn't hear myself think, never mind actually deliver the content. Anyway, so it turns out to be quite difficult to explore choices. It takes discipline. And you can see there are a few neat tricks that that I employed when I did this one, like joining some circles together to make a bicycle or a set of traffic lights. But it's a tremendously valuable skill to be able to have the discipline to be willing to explore choices before you make a decision. And it's through that we tend to discover the most interesting new ideas. So, the football may have been the first thing that I drew, but it was not the most interesting thing on there, I got to more interesting things as I started to draw, as I started to explore more things. Now, I will admit I took more than a minute to do this one, but I'm allowed to cheat. I'm a designer. All right. So if this ability to explore ideas is I think central actually to creativity, the willingness to do that. But once you have ideas, as I mentioned earlier, you have to be able to do something about them, act on them. You have to be able to make something. You have to be able to turn an idea into something that's meaningful for other people, meaningful for yourself, something that's tangible in some kind of way. And as I was implying earlier, in many ways this is the most difficult step for most people when it comes to being creative. It's the thing that stops us. It's like, how do I go from these words or from this little sketch into something that's actually real? It can take skill, or it can take great determination. This is, I think, an interesting example of somebody who applied great determination in order to go from thinking about things to making things. Some of you may have seen his TED Talk. This is a guy by the name of William Kwakamba, who did live in Malawi when he did everything that I'm just about to tell you about. I think he was about 14, or maybe 15, and he'd heard of cell phones, and he was really determined that somehow his family were going to have a cell phone. But there was a problem. There was no power in his village. And so there was no way to charge a cell phone. And so he was in the library one day, and he saw some books and he saw some pictures of windmills and realized, a windmill could make power and I could charge a cell phone. And so merely by reading a bunch of books in the library, in the local village, and I suspect there weren't very many books in that library, by the way, he figured out how to build a windmill for his family, for his village, that he could charge a cell phone with. And he built it. And he went on to build many other things. He was telling me about a sensor network that he ended up building to keep lions out of the paddock. Not a problem we have around here, it turns out, very often. Although I guess with the wolves working their way down from Oregon, it might be more of an issue coming in the next few years. But so it turned out that William was somebody who had a natural determination to make things, and make things that made a big difference to his family. And if you're interested in reading about it, I thoroughly recommend this book, which is his story, The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. Now, it turns out that William got quite a lot of attention from a bunch of TEDsters, who ended up sponsoring him, and he's just in his final year at Brown University studying engineering right now. So I'm trying to attract him to come and work at IDEO if I can, but we'll see whether we succeed in that. But it's remarkable what he's done. So that's an inspirational book about somebody who overcame whatever resistance or reluctance he may have had to make things. And it was a heroic quest in many ways. But the wonderful thing about today, the thing that I'm one of the things I'm most excited about in design is that making things is getting easier and easier. And the access to the tools of making is getting easier all the time, whether it's 3D printing, whether it's simple coding techniques that kids are already learning, whether it's platforms like Kickstarter that make it possible not only for us to make things, but to fund the making of those things, and even turn them into viable businesses. These are a couple of our guys last summer decided they were going to design the world's thinnest watch, and they raised $1 million in, I don't know, 6 weeks or something to fund what is now a business called Central Standard Time. And so the barriers that once used to exist between us having an idea and making something that could make a dent on the planet, those barriers are coming down all the time. They're coming down to the extent that even industries that were once only accessible to the world's largest companies are now not. They're accessible to many, many more people. This is a company called Local Motors, some of you may have come across, that's a crowdsourced off-road vehicle design company that's developed a series of off-road vehicles now, including vehicles for the US military, only using kind of crowdsourced engineers and designers, and then building these things in local factories, micro factories in local markets, wherever these products are being sold. And so, I really do think that over the next couple of decades, we're going to see a transformation around how things get made, and that local high-tech manufacturing will start to appear again in our communities, and may actually transform jobs in the future, which would be tremendously exciting if that did indeed happen. But unfortunately, there's another but. The myth that build it and they will come turns out not to be true. Even though making is a tremendously important part of the creative process, and if we don't make things, there's nothing for us to offer out into the world, it isn't quite enough. And so design thinkers don't have to be just great explorers and masterful builders. We also have to be great storytellers. We have to be able to bring our innovations to life. We have to be able to bring our ideas to life for other people. And I love going around the world and meeting interesting innovators, interesting entrepreneurs who are also great storytellers. And this is one of my favorite that I've met in the last year. This is a guy called Fraser Doherty, and he comes from Scotland. He has a beautiful lilting Scottish accent, which helps his storytelling. And at the age of 14, he was visiting with his grandmother, who also lives in Scotland. Surprise, surprise. And she taught him how to make jam. It's a little bit unusual for a 14-year-old guy to be interested in making jam, but his grandmother taught him how to make jam. And he got really excited about making this jam, and so he decided to turn it into a business, and he did. And that business is now a multi-million-dollar business, selling jam in the UK's biggest retail outlets, and is now beginning to go out to the world. I met him in South Korea, actually. They were just opening their South Korean distribution franchise when I bumped into him last year. And he's made storytelling part of the whole of his business. Not only does he tell a wonderful story about how he created the jam and what it means to him and what the values are of his organization, but he also has a non-profit that he built in alongside the jam company, which are these tea parties that he holds out in the community for elderly people to come together and tell stories to each other while eating fresh-made scones and his lovely jam. It's a beautiful story, but it's very hard to imagine how. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of little jam companies that start off every year. People who are passionate about jam. And so it wasn't that he made great jam that was the difference between him with now a very large business at the age, I think he's 21 now, or 20, and most of these little homemade jam makers. For me, the thing that I think makes the difference to him is he's a wonderful storyteller, and he can bring his business and his ideas to life. So creating new choices, going from thinking to doing, and the art of storytelling are just three of the fundamentals of design thinking, and there are many more. But when you meet Fraser, one of the things that's most compelling about him, I think, is his optimism. He is a wonderfully optimistic man. And that's another crucial part of creative confidence. And another place that brings us back, I think, to children. It turns out the more optimistic you are, the more creative you are. They fuel each other. The optimism that comes from the optimism that drives the feeling that you can do anything leads you to have outrageous ideas. And of course, when they're successful, you're even more optimistic. And of course, the reverse has been true. I mean, looking at this picture, even though it's a famous picture, makes me quite nauseous. If I am trying to imagine myself out on that girder, I think high above the Empire State Building, eating my lunch. Amazing that these guys did this in such a sort of an everyday way. And psychologists have shown that if you put somebody into a situation they perceive as dangerous, like if 99.9% of the population, if you put them in this place, they lose all of their creativity. They lose all of their willingness or ability to think about new things. They're just focused on survival. And I think stripping optimism away does the same thing. If you put people into environments that are not optimistic, then they don't think creatively. And so in schools, most of the time, fortunately, we're not dealing with life-threatening situations, but we are dealing with environments where every ounce of optimism, can get stripped out and, leaving dreary and uninspiring cultures, not just in schools, but also in the workplace. Now, I'm not saying every school's like that. Most schools aren't. That's obviously an old picture. It was more like the school I went to as a kid. But it's worth, I think, making the point that our environments affect how we feel, and how we feel affects how creative we are. It's obvious. And so it's why companies that rely on creativity for their very being, companies like Pixar or Google or my own company, go to great effort to create environments and cultures that are playful, that create trust and ultimately create optimism. And they're places where it's okay to take risks. And it turns out that if you put kids into a more creative environment, then their optimism and their openness to explore ideas increases quite quickly. And I think that's what the museum's all about, right? It's putting kids into an environment where they can explore. And we found that if we bring kids into IDEO, even for just a few days, and these are some kids that were participating in a design boot camp that we do in the summer at IDEO, we can soon get them designing and building with great confidence. We've even managed to do the same thing with business people, remarkable as it may sound. So the combination of creative confidence, which is the mindset, and design thinking as a tool set, has the potential to equip kids and adults with what's necessary to take their creativity out into the world, I think. And as I mentioned, we've never had more need of it than we do today. And I think there are some good examples of it already happening in the world. And so I thought I'd sort of end up by just covering a few of those quite quickly. Here in the Bay Area, we've got leading Bay Area schools like Nueva, Castilleja, Lick Wilmerding, who are building innovation labs, maker spaces, and workshops. And you see the kids that come through these environments, through these institutions, and you see the difference in their creative confidence. It's wonderful. But unfortunately, these institutions only touch small numbers of very fortunate children who get to attend them. There are a growing number of design thinking programs built into curriculums around the world. And we actually built this map along with the D School at Stanford to show where these things are bubbling up. And so that's something you can go and, if you search D School, I think you can find that map if you're interested in it. At a far larger scale, the Riverside Design Competition out of India has more than 1 million kids every year participating in finding creative solutions for their own local communities, not just in India, but beyond in South America and across Africa. We're seeing, again beyond the US, more visionary approaches to transforming whole education systems that might support the growth of creative confidence and indeed raise the overall standard of academic attainment. And we were very fortunate last couple of years ago to be asked to work on a new school system that's getting built in Peru called Innova Schools. And we were asked to design the whole system. We got to design the campuses themselves, the classroom teaching model. We took Sal Khan down from the Khan Academy down to Peru and created a Spanish version of the Khan Academy. And we got to build all the technology tools, all of the lesson planning and lesson sharing tools, and indeed the business models. And when I went down and visited last summer to the At the time we had, I think this was the 5th or 6th school that had been built. We now, even just another year later, have 25 schools built. It was remarkable to see the energy and you saw these posters about design thinking all over the campus. I had a wonderful day. And already, even in a short period, we're seeing things like math attainment scores going up considerably. We're seeing levels of engagement of the kids going up considerably. These schools they're a private school system, very low cost. They're sold out months before the schools are constructed in terms of getting their students enrolled. So it's exciting that we're seeing these kinds of investments and innovations going on in different parts of the world. Closer to home, I think that the first robotics competition, which some of you may have come across if you've got teenage kids, is remarkable. Tens of thousands of kids every year getting exposed to their first experiences of making things, of building things, of kind of creative engineering, of working in teams, of collaborating. These are some pictures from the Castellea first robotics team, which I helped coach for a few years. And just to see these girls, grabbing hold of a soldering iron for the first time, thinking about a system for the first time and building it, it was just incredibly exciting. And many of the girls that were involved in this have gone on to design schools and engineering schools across the country. And then finally, we're seeing an appetite amongst educators to bring design thinking and creative confidence into the classroom. We built something called Design Thinking for Educators, which is a toolkit. We published it a couple of years ago now. We've had close to 50,000 downloads from teachers across the country and actually beyond the US who are using this toolkit to bring design thinking into the classroom. So I'd ask you to ponder on this question. It's no longer enough to give our children educational experiences that build their kind of academic and analytical skills. We also need to find ways to build their design thinking skills, their creative confidence. And after all, we are relying on them to be tomorrow's innovators. So we owe it to them to equip them with the skills to allow them to do that. And while I've spoken quite a bit about the role of schools today, it's institutions, I think, like the Bay Area Discovery Museum that play a pivotal role in bringing this to all kids. And so I'd like to say thanks. Thanks for letting me be up here for a while. And I'd encourage you to support this wonderful institution. Thank you. And by the way, you can all take your little sketches home and show your kids how well you did at school today. I think there's time for one or two questions, if anybody's interested. Otherwise, I'm happy to hop off stage. But I think there's somebody over there.
Hello, I'm a kindergarten teacher, and you've shared with us a lot of things and spaces that attend creative thinking. Can you talk a bit about attitudes that can help to, bring about this creative confidence, ways of talking to kids, maybe even the kinds of jams that we can put kids in? And that's a pun that I mean.
Hopefully there are a couple of things that I mentioned there that I think are worth kind of coming back to. I mean, optimism is, as I said, an essential part of unlocking people's creativity. So putting kids in situations where they feel safe in exploring new possibilities. Curiosity, I mean, it's obvious, but it's very rare that we find interesting answers unless we ask interesting questions. And so encouraging curiosity in kids, I know it can be, I remember as a parent how kind of painful it was and how wearing it was when your 5-year-old was asking why about absolutely everything they come across. But the truth is, that's what we need to be doing when we're 25 as well as 5. So encouraging kids to stay curious and to explore the questions that they're asking, rather than just simply giving them an answer. I'm amazed how even kids at a kindergarten age are able to work together to find solutions that interest them to problems or questions that interest them. And so the Riverside competition that I was talking about, these kids are across a range, but they're certainly elementary age, school age when they're many of them are doing this stuff. And they're solving problems like, how can we pick up all the litter more efficiently in our playground? I mean, they're things that they might care about and they can solve. So I'd encourage, I mean, I'm sure you already, I mean, kindergarten is a place where there's not so much structured learning, I'm guessing, but it's a long time since I was in a kindergarten classroom. But anything you can do to encourage kids to try projects, explore things, work together, I think you'll find equips them well as they head off into elementary school. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. My name is Jim Egan. I'm head of school at Synapse School in Menlo Park. And I was thinking about the gentleman who had a creative solution for the MRI machine, and you said it was his confidence, but it seems to me what he really had was empathy. That started with empathy. And I'd like to, can you speak about that for a few moments?
Yeah, I decided not to talk about empathy today because I generally talk about empathy anytime I talk about design, and I was sat there when I was writing this talking, am I going to do the whole empathy thing? And no, everybody knows that already. So I decided not to, but you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the fundamentals of design certainly is that the point of design is that you're creating things that make the world a better place for other people, not just yourself. And so if you're going to do that, you have to have empathy for what their needs are. And obviously, he had that moment of empathy, which was when Doug was in that scanning suite and he saw that girl crying, and the nurse explained to him what that was all about. He suddenly looked at the situation and looked at his technology in a completely different way. And putting ourselves into those moments where we can have empathy for others is essential. And finding ways to give kids that opportunity is important. But it's anybody that wants to be effective as a designer. I mean, I think there are forms of creative expression that don't actually need you to be empathic. But I think certainly if you want to innovate for other people, then empathy is essential. And I think curiosity and empathy actually go together very well. That we can be curious about the world, but we can also be curious about other people. And that being curious about other people and being willing to enter into their lives in some way is what ultimately helps you build empathy. So I'd say that those two things, empathy and curiosity, are things that we need to encourage both of them. I think there's a couple over here. You got?
I guess on the empathy question, how do you build empathy in kids, showing them what some of the things going on in the world that are maybe not so ideal and keep their optimism up at the same time?
Yeah, well, I don't know how you do it for kids. I'll give you some thoughts, but I'll just tell you about experience. Last week I was in Zambia. I'm working on a project down there right now on teenage contraception and pregnancy. There's a whole bunch of issues about AIDS and all kinds of things that down there, and it's easy to think, we're heading down there and all these tremendously disadvantaged people, and they've got these 40% AIDS infection rates and all kinds. But I have to say, my week down there was the most uplifting week I've had in a while. Hanging out with a bunch of teenage kids, finding out about their lives, finding out what they cared about, of course, realizing how smart they are, of course, realizing how they weren't very different from my own, what I remember of my own teenage kids, and so being actually exposed to the real situation turned out to be uplifting and optimistic, at least for me. Now I know there are situations where that's not going to be the case, but in many cases it is. I think if the more we expose kids to the world around them, the more that we let them inquire. It's not so much us telling them, but let them inquire, let them explore. And we still have the problem of distance to deal with. There's a certain amount we can do virtually, but we still have to overcome distance. But I think kids, kids are fascinated by new things and including being fascinated by new people. And again, this is not my area of expertise, but my own observation has been that kids are actually often, they have far fewer hang-ups about inquiring about people, about learning about people, than we do as adults. And so if we can put them into the situations, then I think they'll benefit. Last one, maybe? Who's got a microphone in their hands? Okay, that's usually the winning move, is up the microphone.
I'm curious if you have any thoughts on the new charter school that's opening up in San Mateo that's in part sponsored by the D School, or at least they're highly involved in that, and if you've been involved in it, and whether you think that's the right age to really push into design thinking, or if it had been a charter elementary school.
Is it an elementary school? Or I
No,
actually don't know anything about it. Oh, it's a high school. It's not, and it's not Nueva?
No, it hasn't opened yet. I think it's in a year or two.
No, I didn't know. It's party, sorry?
Nueva High School.
Is it? Yeah. Well, I know there's a Nueva High School. Is that where you're going to go? You're going to go to Nueva High School? There's two. Oh, wow. Tell you what, you can come up here and ask the question. No, that's great. No, I'm afraid I don't know about it. I don't see any reason why one can't introduce some of these ideas, obviously in different ways, appropriate ways, at any point in kids' development. I mean, there have been people talking about creating, kind of design thinking based curricula in elementary schools in different parts of the country and even in different parts of the world, as I was mentioning earlier. So I personally don't see anything particularly disadvantageous about that, as long as you get the balance of the curriculum right. I mean, it is important to not assume that this is an approach that is everything that kids need in terms of their education. But so you wanted to add something?
Can I just speak?
Yes.
I'm sorry I'm as chatty as my son here.
He's great.
I just wanted to add one comment to this, and I thought it was a fantastic talk. Thank you very much. When I heard these stats, I was very struck, so I just wanted to share the stats on heritability of creativity. So when I was reading, and I do a little bit of research, but so when you think about the heritability of IQ, for example, by the time you reach adulthood, and given that you're in a very nice environment, then the heritability is 80% or so, and I'm sure you know these stats, but so it's strikingly heritable. And I don't want to make any comments on the IQ, but what I wanted to point out was the heritability of creativity, and there's various stats on it, but the number is about, on average, maybe 25% or so. So strikingly lower compared to the heritability, how much you get passed on from parents and other generations in terms of compared to IQ. And for example, motivation, there's a paper coming out also on the heritability of motivation, for example, which is another component that's very important for us. And that's, for example, 40% or so too. So I just wanted to point that out to support the claim of the importance of creative thinking and what we should do for children.
No, thanks a lot. That's great. So I guess that means environment matters, right? So, okay, thanks very much. Thank you.
It's heavy. So first of all, I want to say thank you to Tim, not only for sharing your time and knowledge, but for waiving your speaking fee as well. And here are some of our favorite toys.
Oh, brilliant.
Put them on your desk next
great.
time you're stuck.
Perfect.
Hopefully they'll help you think creatively. So not only as a parent am I grateful for the insights that Tim has shared, but I pledge to all of you that as CEO of the Discovery Museum, that we will continue to endeavor to provide those opportunities to nurture creative thinking in your own children, as it very much aligns with our mission to ignite and advance creative thinking for all children. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for, I'd love to invite you to join Tim and the rest of us in investing in the museum. Every dollar that you pledge today goes to creating those innovative experiences both at the museum that help support our professional development programs, and I would encourage you to give generously this afternoon. Thank you for your time and for joining us today.